Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. This is a video about nested data structures in JavaScript. The idea is to get used to the idea that, sometimes you have objects in arrays and objects and functions and arrays, functions and objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a lot of different random data structures and show you kind of how to access them. So first we'll do is just do an array of objects, okay? Because it's probably one of the most common you'll see. An array of objects. So let's see here. Let's say we have const, we'll call it dogs, because we'll say it's an array of dogs. So it's an array, and each item in the array is an object with the name of a dog, Spot, and the age of the dog, 6. Okay, and then we'll put comma. Okay, and then we'll have Fluffy. We will have Clifford, and we will have a Lassie. Okay. So the idea is, like, how do I access the property? Like, I could console log the whole array by doing console.log dogs. That'll console log the whole array. But let's say I want to get the Fluffy. Fluffy is the second thing in the array. So if you're familiar with arrays, arrays are accessed by an index. So console.log dogs1. Okay, so that's going to access Fluffy because Fluffy is the second thing in the array. Now let's say I want to access Fluffy's name. Then I would access console.log dogs1 because Fluffy's the second thing in the array. And then we do .name because technically the second thing in the array is an object. And then an object's properties are accessed with dot notation. So since dogs is an array, I access an item of the array with the square brackets using an index. But since the thing that's there is an object, then I can then chain off a .name. So the idea is each step is chaining off where you're at. So first I start off with the array. I say which item in the array I want. That thing, this is technically, then that means like this is the object. So then .name is the property from that object I want to access. And let's just run that. Node scratch.js. And you see first we console log the array, then we console log Fluffy, and then we console log Fluffy's name. Okay, neat. Cool. And I'm going to just kind of block these sections off. I'll also do this console.log okay. See, so that section is done there. Okay. Now let's do return value of a function. Okay. Functions that return objects. Okay, so let's say const. And again, basically you can mix and match these data structures any way you want. So you could technically have an array of objects, and those objects is a function. That function returns another object. You could do that. So let's say your const. We'll call this dog gen. What it does, it generates a dog. So what this function does, it takes in a name and an age, and returns an object. And here's the returns an object with the name and the age. And then this object also has an array of treats that this dog likes. So we'll say bacon, salmon. Cool. Okay. Now if I console.log doggen the function, I'm just going to get the function. Okay, this is just the function as a value. If I console.log doggen and invoke the function, I'm going to use the function, I'm going to get back the object. Okay, because the function returns the object. And I'm running the function, so the return value gets passed the console log. Okay. But since console.log doggen, since the function returns the object, I can then do this. I can say, hey, get me the treats well, the name of the object, and that'll get me the name of the dog. And then I can do console.log doggen, invoke the function. That gets me the object from the function. Dot treats. So that accesses the array. And then let's say I want to access salmon, that'd be the second thing in the array. And you end up getting something like that. So I'm saying, hey, invoke the function. The return value of the function is an object. So I can access the property of that object with dot treats. Dot treats is an array. So I can access which thing from that array I want that way. So you see it just compounds. You have to think through like each step. So first step, I invoke the function. That gives me the object. Now I want to access a property of the object. So I do dot the name of the property. And that property is an array. So now I use the square brackets to access the array. Okay. Now let's see here. Let's run that. Okay, and we see here we console log. Oh, I didn't pass any arguments because so let me just do that. Fluffy 5. Let me pass some arguments to each of these. Okay, so you see here, we console log the function, we just get function doggen because we're just logging the function. We're not using the function, we're not invoking the function. We're just saying, hey, we have this function here. Okay, then the second time, I console log the function invoked, so that gives me the return value, which is the object, Fluffy, because again, this function returns this object. But then I say, hey, I want to access the name of that object. Okay. And the beauty of like understanding like nested data structures is that means you don't have to constantly be saving stuff in variables each step of the way, saying, okay, let's go save this object here. Let me go grab this property, save that in a variable. You could just kind of go deep within a large complex object kind of in one line. Or if a function returns a deeply complex object, you could just chain off of it. Like you can really write your code much more succinctly if you really appreciate sort of like how each type of data, like how does a function behave versus an array versus an object, and how to kind of bury them, like how do I find that function buried in an object or buried in an array. So for example, okay, let's do an array of functions. Okay, and then let me just go grab this, put it at the beginning, and one at the end, so that we can kind of see each section kind of cordoned off. Okay, so let's say const func array equals an array, and then the first thing in the array is a function that all it does is console.logs iWork. And then the second thing in the array is another function. And this function, what it does is returns another function. And what this function does is console.logs I'm a function returned by another function. So let's console.log the array. And now let's try to use the first function, console.log func array. So that's going to be the first item in the array, so that's an index of 0. But since what's in the array is a function, I can then just put parentheses after it. So I'm invoking the function that's located in the first spot of the array. Okay, and then that'll console.log iWork. Although I don't need the console log this then, because that's the console log's built in. Okay. And then for the second one, func array, if I do a console.log func array second item in the array and invoke the function, that's just going to return me the function, so I should just get a log of a function. But what if I want to, but since that function returns a function, I can call that function right away. So I can do this, like func array 1, I invoke the function, that returns a function, so then I invoke that function. So what I'm doing here is I'm invoking the function that this first function returns. Okay, so here's where the syntax starts getting kind of funky, because I'm thinking, okay, there's an array. I want to access the second index, which is a function. Now this function returns this function. So essentially when I invoke this function, that's going to return this function. And then I invoke that function with another set of parentheses. So let's test that out. So you see like the first, we got the array, and see the array has two functions inside of it. So it's an array of functions. Okay. And then we see that I use the first function and I get iWork. So you can create like an array of functions. Generally not the most useful way to do it. It's much easier when you give the functions a name. So oftentimes you'll nest them in an object. But the idea is you can do it, which is my point. And then see this, this line here, when I just invoke the function, just one parentheses, see I'm only getting back that returned function, this thing right here. So when I put both parentheses, see I'm actually invoking, at the end I'm invoking the function returned by the other function. I'm doing it all in one line. So I'm going into the array, I'm using the first function, that function gives me back a function, and I run that function. Okay, so you can see like there's a lot of different ways to do it. I mean, you could even theoretically, just to kind of show you just like a bonus one, I think we kind of illustrated the point. But you can even do an array of classes. I find this to be the funniest one. When I tried to do this once, I was shocked that it worked. It just didn't make sense as something you could do. Okay, so const, we'll say wizards. Okay, and we'll just say an array, and then you can just do this class, and you know you can just say name equals Bob. Okay, something simple. I'm not gonna go through. I'm gonna create a whole bunch of methods and stuff, but I could just do this like class name equals Steve. Okay, so that works. I create an array of classes, and now I can do this. I can say const Bob equals a new wizards 0. Okay, so since that's a class, what's stored in this variable is a class, I can use the new keyword in front of it. That's pretty interesting. Const const Steve equals new wizards 1. Okay, and what I do find this actually pretty useful, the fact that you could use classes like a data type, is when you have functions that return a class. Because that way you can create like customizable classes, which can be actually kind of useful in certain situations. But now if I do console.log like Bob, console.log Steve, I get instances of those objects. Okay, let's try that out. Let's see, I get a Bob object and a Steve object. Exciting. Okay, again, this is probably something I would never do in an array of classes. Again, more than likely, kind of like functions, I would probably do something more like wizards as an object, and then maybe like wizards.fire, wizards.ice, so that we have different types of wizards that you can instantiate. But, you know, like, you can do it. Okay, that's the point. Like, the point is you can literally just do anything you want. Okay, you return a class. Okay, so essentially we could just say, hey, what this first thing is, it's a function that returns a class. Okay, so in that case, what I would do is I would modify this and say invoke that function, and that works because that function returns a class, so I can use the new keyword. So I can do a new this thing, and it still would work. Okay, I got an error, so let me see why. New wizards 0 is not a constructor. I get that, but I invoked it. Okay, I think here's where we, like, this works. I think I remember running this issue before. So here's where we push the limits. So here I'd actually have to save the class in a variable first. So I'd have to be like wizards 0, do that, and then I can do like new wiz. Like this would still work. So there's a limit to how much I can chain. See, like that still works. But I guess the order that it resolves in, the new keyword is going to get applied before this has a chance to actually return the class. So in that case, you have to kind of do it that. But again, the point is you can do some crazy stuff. Okay. So the bottom line is you take a look at a data structure. You start, so if it's an object, you start with an object and you ask yourself, how do I access properties of an object? If that property is an array, you ask yourself, how do I access an element in an array? If the next thing's a function, then I ask myself, what's the return value? If the return value is an array, how do I access the array? And you can kind of keep chaining and keep going deeper as long as you appreciate the different data types that JavaScript has. Because everything can be chained off the next data type in the chain. So hopefully that, I will make a gist. Okay, so let me just copy this code and make another gist. I'm kind of liking this whole gist thing now. So we'll make a gist and say, hey, nested data structures in JavaScript. We'll call this nested js.js. Okay. And I will create a public gist and I'll put this link in the video description. Okay. Cool. So now we have this clip here. Neat. Okay. Nice. Now I finally understand why to use GIS. Okay. But you guys have a great day. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Enjoy. See you later.